The celebration looked like a photograph I didn't belong in, soft light strung across the ceiling, candles trembling on white tablecloths, champagne catching the glow like liquid gold. From the doorway, I watched strangers laugh around a long table that used to feel like home, every clink of glass a reminder that I was the one thing this room had decided it could live without. At the center of it all stood Sloane. Her laugh floated above the chatter, perfectly timed, perfectly bright. She leaned into Darius as if she'd been practicing the pose for months, one manicured hand wrapped around a flute of champagne, the other resting possessively on the swell of her pregnant belly. My husband, no, ex-husband, as of this afternoon's stack of signed documents and a judge's bored nod, tilted his glass toward hers. The people around them cheered like they were watching a royal announcement. "To new beginnings," someone shouted. The words rolled around the room, a chorus of well-meaning voices that had no idea what they were blessing. New beginnings. For them, it meant a fresh start, a baby on the way, a pretty little love story wrapped in fairy lights. For me, it meant standing in the doorway of my old life, holding the proof that none of this should exist. No one noticed me slip in through the side entrance where the caterers came and went. I stayed in the shadow of a curtain, fingers locked around a manila envelope pressed tight against my chest. It was creased from the drive over, damp at the corners where my palms wouldn't stop sweating. 6 months of digging, of quietly piecing together what didn't make sense, rested inside that thin layer of paper. 6 months of clinic logs and late-night emails. 6 months of forged signatures and bribed hands. 6 months of proof that Sloane hadn't just gotten pregnant. She'd taken what was never hers to touch. I used to think grief was the heaviest thing a person could carry. I was wrong. The heaviest thing is proof, cold, undeniable proof, that the nightmare you suspected is real, and that the people smiling under the chandeliers helped build it. Darius tipped his head back and laughed at something Sloane whispered in his ear. The sound cut through me, sharp and familiar. Same dimples, same easy charm, same suit he wore the night we chose baby names over takeout containers at this very table. Back then, we were 2 people waiting for our turn to be parents. Now he was the headline of a story I hadn't written, starring a woman who had studied my life long enough to step cleanly into it. I could have stayed where I was, hidden behind the curtain with my evidence and my shaking hands. I could have turned around, walked back to the car, and let them keep their illusion a little longer. Instead, I stepped forward. Each click of my heels on the hardwood snapped against the music like a metronome counting down. One by one, heads turned. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Faces rearranged themselves, curiosity first, then recognition, then that strange, hungry look people get when they realize they're about to witness something they'll talk about for weeks. Sloane saw me next. Her smile faltered, just a fraction, her fingers tightening over her belly before she forced the curve back into place. She tried to reposition herself so Darius would block me from view. Too late. Darius followed the tilt of her gaze. When he found me, everything on his face went slack. The glow, the charm, the performance, it all dropped away, leaving a man who suddenly remembered the life he'd set on fire to stand in this room. Our eyes locked across the candles and the flowers and the smiling people who didn't understand yet that the air had changed. For a second, the memory of who we used to be flickered between us like a faulty bulb. Nights at the fertility clinic, his hand squeezing mine, whispered promises about our baby, our future. Then I watched something colder slide in behind his eyes. Fear. Without breaking eye contact, I reached the head of the table. The envelope felt impossibly light as I lifted it, impossibly loud when I let it drop onto the polished wood between his plate and Sloane's untouched dessert. The thud cut through the music. The room held its breath. Sloane reached for it first, a nervous laugh bubbling out of her. "Naomi, what are you?" "Careful," I said quietly, my voice steadier than my heartbeat. "It's fragile." Darius's hand landed on the envelope. His fingers brushed the jagged crease where I'd gripped it too hard on the drive over. He looked from it to me, searching my face for some version of the woman he used to believe would never do something like this. "It's all in there," I told him. "The clinic records. The emails. The signatures you never wrote. The test that proves that baby is yours, and that you were never in the room when he was made." A murmur rippled down the length of the table, chairs scraping as people leaned closer. Someone gasped. Someone else swore under their breath. Balloons bobbed uselessly over the scene, white and innocent, tied to the back of chairs that suddenly looked like witness stands. Sloane's face was drained of color. "You don't know what you're talking about." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had slid into my life as a friend, who had stood in my kitchen and asked about our IVF journey with big, sympathetic eyes. The woman who now wears my dream on her body while everyone toasted her courage. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said. "You didn't just steal my husband, Sloane. You stole the child we were supposed to have together." For a heartbeat, the whole room went silent. Even the music seemed to hesitate. Later, there would be sirens in hospital corridors and a baby fighting for his life under blue lights, and none of these people would remember what canapés they'd eaten or what jokes they'd laughed at. They would remember this moment, the crack in the night where the truth finally climbed out. But that night didn't begin here, with an envelope on a crowded table and a party frozen mid-toast. It began months earlier, on a much quieter evening, when I walked into my own home carrying a box of dessert for my husband and found Sloane Whitaker exactly where I never expected to see her. And back then, she was still pretending to be my friend. We're about to get hooked on this. Subscribe now so you're here for every new story. It began months earlier, on a much quieter evening, when I walked into my own home carrying a box of dessert for my husband and found Sloane Whitaker exactly where I never expected to see her. And back then, she was still pretending to be my friend. I remember the weight of the bakery box digging into my fingers, the little smear of chocolate frosting on the corner of the lid. It had been a good day, one of the rare ones in that season where nothing hurt. We'd had a small win at work, my boss had complimented a proposal, and I'd decided to stop by Darius's favorite bakery on the way home. Surprise him, I'd thought, standing in line between a teenager on FaceTime and an elderly woman arguing about prices. "You've both earned something sweet." The sky was just starting to bruise purple when I pulled into our driveway. Our living room lights glowed through the front windows, warm and inviting. For a second, I let myself picture the evening, Darius on the couch, loosened tie, that tired smile of his. Me handing over the box like an apology for yet another doctor's appointment circled on the calendar. I balanced the dessert in one arm and fumbled with my keys at the door, humming without thinking. I didn't even bother to be quiet. Why would I? It was my house. My marriage. My life. The first thing that struck me when I pushed the door open was the music, low, sultry, not the playlist Darius usually put on when he was answering emails. The second thing was the smell. Not dinner. Not candles. Perfume. Too much of it, cloying and sweet, hanging in the air like a warning. Darius? I called, nudging the door shut with my hip. I brought. The words tripped over my tongue and died. From where I stood in the entryway, I could see straight through to the living room. The world narrowed to that one square of space, the edge of our couch, the throw blanket I'd bought last winter, the wine glasses abandoned on the coffee table. And them. Darius's shirt was half undone, his hands tangled in Sloane's hair. Sloane, my co-worker, my lunch break confidant, the woman who'd sat across from me and listened to me cry about failed transfers and hormone injections, was straddling his lap, blouse open, her mouth on his like she'd been practicing for this exact moment. The bakery box slipped from my grip. It hit the hardwood with a soft, pitiful thud. The lid flew open, chocolate cake smears bled across the floor like something injured. Sloane jerked her head up first. Her eyes met mine over Darius's shoulder, pupils blown wide, lips swollen. For a fraction of a second, there was naked panic on her face, the look of someone caught stealing. Then it was gone, buried under something cooler, sharper. Darius turned, following her gaze. His expression cycled through shock, confusion, then horror, as if he'd forgotten I existed until that very moment. Naomi, he breathed, scrambling to sit up, to adjust his shirt, to become a husband again in the span of 3 seconds. It's not, this isn't. Don't, I said. My voice sounded wrong, too calm. Please don't insult me and yourself at the same time. Sloane slid off his lap, smoothing her blouse like we were in a boardroom and not my living room. Naomi, we didn't mean for you to find out like this. Oh. I stared at the cake seeping out of the box. Is there a preferred way to walk in on your husband and your friend? She flinched. For a moment, I saw my old Sloane, the one who'd sat in my car and cried about her endometriosis diagnosis, the one who'd asked detailed questions about our IVF consultations, as if she understood the language of heartbreak. That woman looked back at me and seemed to realize, finally, the size of the line she had stepped over. Darius reached for me. I stepped back. My heel landed squarely in frosting and slid. He caught my arm out of reflex. The touch burned. I yanked myself free. Naomi, he started again, voice raw, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's just what? I snapped. What happened? Like tripping down the stairs? What happened to my friend? Into my house? Into my couch? Silence stretched between us. The only sound was the soft spill of music from the speakers, suddenly obscene. Sloane's hands hovered over her belly, flat then, just a stomach, not a statement. Maybe I should go, she murmured. For once, I agree with you, I said. She moved toward the door, every step leaving invisible fingerprints on my life. At the threshold, she hesitated and looked back at Darius, something electric passing between them that made bile rise in my throat. As soon as the door closed behind her, the fight began, sharp words thrown like dishes, apologies that arrived too late, promises that sounded like lies even as he said them. He swore it had started recently. He swore he'd been confused, lonely, broken by the endless fertility disappointments. He swore a lot of things. I remember gripping the back of a dining chair so hard my knuckles went white and asking a question I never thought I'd ask the man I loved. "Are you in love with her?" He opened his mouth. I closed it. I looked away. The answer was in silence. 3 weeks later, I sat in a stiff chair outside a courtroom with a file of divorce papers in my lap. The air smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. A woman down the hall was crying quietly into her phone. A man in a cheap suit was arguing with his lawyer about alimony. My marriage ended with a judge's monotone and the scratch of a pen. "Any questions?" my attorney asked afterward, his eyes already on the next case. "Yeah," I said, gathering the stack of paper that now defined the last 10 years of my life. "What happens when your husband's mistress won't disappear?" Because Sloane hadn't. If anything, she'd stepped more boldly into the light. The first time I saw her post-divorce was at the grocery store, her cart piled with organic snacks, her laugh echoing down the cereal aisle. She spotted me, straightened, and for a heartbeat I thought she might duck away. Instead, she placed a hand on her midsection, the faintest curve just beginning to show. "Naomi," she said, as if we were co-workers who'd run into each other, not two women standing in the ruins of the same life. "I was going to call you." "No," I said. "You weren't." Her mouth twisted. "I wanted you to hear it from me." "What?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. The lightness in her eyes, the way she touched her stomach, it all clicked. "I'm pregnant," she said. "Darius and it happened fast, I know, but," she smiled then, small and satisfied. "He was always meant to be a father. Maybe he just needed the right person to get him there." The tile under my feet seemed to tilt. For a moment, I thought I might faint right there beside the Cheerios. Images flashed in my mind: injections, bruised stomach, negative tests, the sterile chill of the IVF clinic. And now Sloane was telling me she'd done casually what my body had refused to do with years of planning. I didn't remember walking away. I just remembered ending up in my car with my hands shaking so badly I couldn't put the key in the ignition. My sister, Zora, was the first person I told. She showed up at my door that night with takeout and a fury that could have powered a small city. "She just happened to get pregnant?" Zora scoffed, pacing my kitchen. "After years of you two trying? After listening to every detail of your treatment? Naomi, come on. The math doesn't match." "She's younger," I said weakly. "Healthier. Maybe it was easy for her." Zora stopped. "She has endometriosis. She told you that, remember? Said she might never conceive naturally. You cried together on the phone about it for, like, an hour." I did remember. Vividly. Sloane had cried so hard I'd driven over with tissues and ice cream. She hugged me and whispered, "At least you still have options." The memory slid into place next to everything else. Her questions about the clinic. The way she'd insisted on coming with me to one appointment for support. The small smile I'd seen on her face when a nurse mentioned our embryos in storage. The back of my neck prickled. "You think," I swallowed. "You think she did something?" "I think," Zora said carefully, "that this woman admired your life a little too much, and now she's living in your house, pregnant with your ex-husband's baby, 3 weeks after the ink dried. At minimum, the timing is ugly. At worst. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. That night, staring at the ceiling in my empty apartment, I replayed every interaction with Sloane, every supportive comment, every hug. The pieces shifted, rearranging themselves into a new picture, one where nothing was accidental and my pain had been a blueprint. By sunrise, I'd decided I needed answers. Caleb Stone's office smelled like coffee and old paper. He looked more like a friendly history teacher than a private investigator, soft sweater, square glasses, the kind of face people confided in without meaning to. He listened quietly as I told him everything, the affair, the pregnancy, the IVF treatments, Sloane's sudden interest in our doctor visits. "So you're not asking me if she's sleeping with your husband," he said when I finished. "You already know that part." "I'm asking," I said, feeling foolish even as I said it, "if it's possible she used something from our treatments without our consent." Caleb didn't flinch. "In theory? Yes. In practice? It would require access, a compromised clinic employee, and a lot of nerve." "She has plenty of that," I muttered. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Best case scenario, we rule out that possibility and you get peace of mind. Worst case," he shrugged. "We find what we find." "What would you need?" I asked. "Names. Dates. The clinic. Any emails you still have. And if you're willing," he hesitated. "Permission to dig into Sloane's medical history. Fertility consultations, procedures, anything tied to that pregnancy." I slid a folder across his desk, thick with printed records and screenshots. "I already pulled what I could." He smiled faintly. "You're my favorite kind of client." The investigation unfolded in pieces over the next 6 months. It was like watching a photograph develop in slow motion, first blurry shapes, then edges, then details so sharp they cut. Caleb found early appointments with a fertility specialist, months before the affair had officially started. He uncovered a technician at our clinic suddenly flush with cash she couldn't explain. He traced logins made to our patient portal from an IP address that didn't match our home, at hours when I knew neither Darius nor I had been online. Then came the email chains. Buried in a compromised employee's inbox were messages from Sloane, carefully worded but damning when read together, questions about protocol, references to the Whitaker samples, veiled instructions to make sure he doesn't need to sign anything else. The worst piece arrived in a plain white envelope Caleb slid across my table one rainy afternoon, a notarized consent form with Darius's signature. Except it wasn't his. I'd watched him sign his name 1,000 times. On birthday cards. On legal documents. On the back of checks. The loop of the R, the sharp flick of the S. The signature on this form was close, but not perfect. "She traced it," I whispered, running my thumb along the ink. "She traced his name onto consent." Caleb nodded grimly. "I've already sent copies to a forensic document examiner. But paired with the logs we have, the payments, and the employee testimony," he exhaled. "It's a pattern. Can we prove the baby is his?" I asked, throat tight. "We can," he said. "If you're willing to go that far." I thought of Sloane's hand on her belly in the grocery store. Of Darius's face when he'd whispered, "She's pregnant," like he'd been handed a miracle instead of a loaded weapon. "I'm already this far," I said. "Keep going." The DNA test was the final nail. Caleb arranged it quietly, swabbed from a prenatal blood draw Sloane had authorized during routine screening, matched against Darius's stored genetic material from the clinic. 99-point-something%. No ambiguity. "You were right," Caleb said, sliding the results toward me. I stared at the numbers. I thought I'd feel satisfaction, vindication, something. Instead there was just a hollow ache. "So she really," my voice cracked. "She used our samples. She used what we created together, without us. She used him without his consent," Caleb said. "And she used your grief as cover." "I'm sorry." I collected every page, every screenshot, every statement into a neat stack. I bought the manila envelope on a lunch break, standing in the office supply aisle with my heart pounding like I was buying a weapon. By the time the invitation-only New Beginnings party rolled around, a celebration of Sloane's miracle baby and their official coupledom, I wasn't on the guest list. But I had something better. Proof. All of that history hummed under my skin as I stood at the head of the long table in the restaurant, the envelope resting between Darius and Sloane like a small, silent bomb. "What is this?" Darius asked, voice hoarse. "The truth," I said. His fingers trembled as he pulled back the flap. Papers slid out, fanned across the linen, clinic logs, notarized forms, bank statements detailing quiet transfers to a compromised technician, annotated emails showing a timeline that made the room's miracle look more like a crime. Sloane lunged for the stack. I put a hand out, stopping her. "Don't," I said softly. "You've touched enough that doesn't belong to you." She froze, eyes wild. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I picked up one page at random, the forged consent form, and held it up between my thumb and forefinger. "You went to the same clinic Darius and I used. You bribed an employee to access our stored samples. You traced his signature. You used his genetic material without his knowledge and then wrapped it in a pretty story about falling in love." People around us gasped. A woman at the far end of the table covered her mouth with both hands. One of Darius's co-workers muttered a curse under his breath. "That's not what happened," Sloane snapped, voice rising. "Naomi, stop. You're making a scene." "Oh, sweetheart," Zora's voice floated from somewhere behind me. I hadn't even realized she'd moved closer. "The scene made itself when you decided to steal a family." Darius's eyes skimmed the paperwork, moving faster, then slower, then stopping entirely on the DNA report. I watched the exact second the numbers on the page connected with the life it represented. His lips parted. His shoulders sagged. "This," he swallowed hard. "Is this real?" "Ask yourself," I said. "Were you ever in that clinic with her? Did you ever sign anything? Did you ever give consent for your sperm to be used with anyone but me?" He looked up, panic dawning. "No. I thought she told me it happened naturally. That she'd been misdiagnosed. That it was a miracle." Sloane's composure finally cracked. "It is a miracle," she insisted, tears spilling. "Darius, You wanted to be a father so badly. Naomi couldn't. Don't you dare, I cut in, heat flushing my face. Don't you say my name like I'm the problem you solved. Her mouth snapped shut. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing and the faint clink of a candle holder settling on the table as someone's elbow bumped it. This is insanity, one guest whispered. Is any of it true? Another asked. Sloane's gaze bounced from the papers to Darius. Her hands shook on her belly. I did what I had to do, she said finally, voice small. We were meant to be a family. You were wasting years on treatments that weren't working. I just moved things along. By stealing our embryo plans, I said. By using his body without his consent. Do you hear yourself? Tears streaked down her cheeks. You wouldn't have appreciated him, she whispered. Not the way I do. Darius flinched like she'd slapped him. I felt something inside me go cold. Whatever trace of sympathy I'd once had for Sloane evaporated. I spent years appreciating him, I said. I sat in waiting rooms, took injections, held his hand through every disappointment. I loved him enough to let him go when he chose you. I leaned closer, my voice dropping so only the three of us could clearly hear. But this? You didn't just steal him, Sloane. You stole the child we were supposed to have together. You stole our chance. And you turned it into this. I gestured around at the candles, the balloons, the stunned faces. A server in the corner fumbled a tray, glasses rattled. Somewhere, the music finally shut off. We were left in a cocoon of silence. Darius pressed his hands to his face, drawing a ragged breath. I need a minute. He pushed his chair back so violently it scraped lines into the hardwood. Without another word, he staggered away from the table, through the parted crowd, out toward the hallway. Conversations exploded behind him, frantic, hushed, disbelieving. I straightened, suddenly exhausted. My work here was done. The truth lay scattered across the linen like confetti after a parade, impossible to sweep up neatly. Let them stare. Let them choose sides. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reality. I turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking a different rhythm now, less countdown, more release. Naomi. Darius's voice chased me into the corridor. Naomi, wait. I stopped just past the heavy restaurant doors, next to a framed print of some overpriced vineyard. The hallway was cooler, quieter, the noise from the party reduced to a distant roar. Darius caught up, breathless, eyes red. Up close, he looked older than I remembered, like the last few months had aged him by years. How long have you known? He asked. Long enough, I said. He ran a hand over his face. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Why do it like this? In front of everyone? Because you wouldn't have believed me alone, I said simply. She built you a whole narrative. She wrapped it in false hope and happy family pictures. You needed the shock. You needed witnesses. His jaw clenched. I never would have agreed to this, Naomi. You know that, right? I would never. I know, I said softly. That's the only reason I bothered finding proof instead of burning that clinic to the ground. He sagged against the wall, sliding one hand down to rest on his chest. What do I do now? That's not my job anymore, I said. You'll have to decide that on your own. He looked up at me, eyes shining. Is there any way we can come back from this? You and me? The question hung between us, heavy with all the things we'd been and all the things we'd lost. I thought of the little life growing inside Sloane, conceived through deception but still innocent. I thought of the nights at the clinic, the promises we'd made to any future child who'd listen. I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten. I don't know yet, I admitted. I just know one thing, Darius. He waited. She didn't just steal you, I said quietly, each word landing like a stone. She stole our child. His face crumpled. Behind the doors, someone raised their voice. The party was collapsing inward, the way structures do when one crucial beam is kicked out. In a few weeks, there would be doctors and blood and a baby fighting in a plastic box. There would be confessions and hearings and choices no one had prepared for. But in that hallway, with tear tracks cooling on my cheeks and my heart pounding in my ears, all I had was this moment, the first time I'd said the truth out loud in full. I stepped away from him and toward the exit. Naomi, he called one last time. I didn't look back. The night air hit my face as I pushed the door open, cold and bracing, like stepping out of a burning building. I drew in a deep breath, the city lights blurring through my tears. Whatever happened next, nothing, not the marriage, not the baby, not the lies, would ever be the same again. And none of us had any idea just how much that stolen child was going to change everything. 2 weeks later, I was almost starting to believe the worst of it was over. The story of the party had done its laps through Darius's office, our former friend group, and the neighborhood group chat. People sent me cautious texts, "Are you okay?" I heard. Zora screened most of them for me, replying with short, sharp answers that made it clear I was not open to gossip. I went back to work. I learned which podcasts were loud enough to drown out my thoughts on the drive home. I ignored the way my chest tightened every time I passed the restaurant. Life didn't feel normal, but it felt survivable. Then my phone rang at 3:17 on a Tuesday morning. I was halfway between sleep and one of those dreams where the fertility clinic hallways never end. I fumbled on the nightstand, knocking over a glass of water before finally getting the phone to my ear. "Hello? Is this Naomi Bennett?" a woman asked. Her voice was clipped but kind, threaded with urgency. "Yes," I said, squinting at the caller ID. "Unknown number. Area code for the city hospital." My stomach dipped. "Who is this?" "This is Nurse Patel from Memorial. You've been listed as the emergency contact for a Sloane Whitaker." The room snapped into focus around me. "What?" "She's been brought in with a suspected placental abruption," the nurse continued. "There's significant bleeding. We're preparing for an emergency C-section. We've been trying to reach the father listed, a Darius Bennett, but his phone is going straight to voicemail. You were second on the form." For a moment, all I could hear was my heartbeat roaring in my ears. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. "You're sure I'm the contact?" "Yes, ma'am." "Your name, your number. Can you come to the hospital? We may need consent for certain interventions if we can't reach Mr. Bennett in time." I stared at the wall, at the faint outline where our wedding photos had hung before I took them down. "How far along is she?" 23 weeks, 5 days, the nurse said. The baby's very premature. Time is critical. 23 weeks. Barely viability. My mind flipped through everything the reproductive endocrinologist had ever told us about outcomes at that gestation. Words like fragile, uncertain, long NICU stay crowded in. I hated Sloane. I hated what she'd done, what she'd taken. But I couldn't ignore the other truth: there was a baby in danger, one that had never asked to be a weapon. "I'm on my way," I said. The hospital at night felt like a different planet, hushed and fluorescent, everything important happening behind doors marked authorized personnel only. I parked crooked in the emergency lot and half ran to the entrance, my breath clouding in the cold. "Emergency contact for Sloane Whitaker," I blurted at the front desk. They called me Naomi Bennett. The clerk's eyes flicked to her screen, then softened. "She's already been taken up to labor and delivery. Take the elevator to 5. Follow the red line on the floor." I followed it, heart hammering, hands shaking so badly I kept jabbing the wrong elevator button. On the 5th floor, chaos swallowed me whole. A nurse rushed past with a blood bag, another with a tray of instruments. A monitor alarm wailed down the hall. "Naomi?" A woman in blue scrubs stepped in front of me. Her badge read Patel, RN. "I spoke to you on the phone." "Yes," I said. "How is she? How's the baby?" Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes tightened. Ms. Whitaker came in with heavy bleeding and severe pain. The placenta is partially detached. The baby's heart rate has been unstable. We're moving quickly. Is she conscious? Barely, the nurse said. She's lost a lot of blood. We're working on both of them. As if on cue, 2 orderlies pushed a gurney past us. Sloane lay on it, skin waxy, hair stuck to her forehead with sweat. Her gown was stained nearly black down the middle. A doctor ran beside her, one hand on her belly, barking numbers I didn't understand. For a second, her eyes fluttered open. They met mine, unfocused, desperate. "Naomi," she whispered, or maybe mouthed, it was so faint I couldn't be sure. Her hand twitched on the edge of the sheet, reaching for something that wasn't there. Then the doors to the operating room swallowed her. Nurse Patel touched my elbow. "We'll update you as soon as we can. Do you have any way to reach Mr. Bennett?" I pulled out my phone. 3 calls to Darius. Straight to voicemail. "Maybe his battery died," I said. Or maybe he'd turned it off to avoid reporters, co-workers, the mess his life had become. "I'll keep trying." She nodded, then disappeared through the double doors. I was left alone in the hallway under harsh lights, staring at a sign that read OB Surgical Suite while my brain played a montage of every version of Sloane I'd ever known: the coworker, the friend, the thief, the woman on the gurney. I sank onto a plastic chair. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't know if it was adrenaline or something else. I'd wanted accountability. I hadn't wanted anyone to die. Time stretched, then folded in on itself. I registered things in fragments: the hum of the vending machines, the squeak of rubber soles, the coolness of a styrofoam cup of water someone pressed into my hands. I kept calling Darius. On the 7th try, his voicemail finally clicked over to a human voice. "Hello? Where have you been?" I snapped, relief and fury colliding. Why aren't you answering your phone? A pause. Naomi? She's at Memorial, I said. Placental abruption. Emergency C-section. They couldn't reach you. You need to get here. Now. He swore under his breath. I was at my parents' place. My phone died, I didn't. I'm on my way. He hung up without saying goodbye. A nurse appeared in the doorway of the surgical suite. Ms. Bennett? I stood so fast my knees cracked. Yes. Did she? The baby's out, the nurse said. We're still working on Ms. Whitaker. She's lost a lot of blood, but she's responding to transfusions. The OB will speak with you shortly. And the baby? My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. Is he alive? Baby boy, she said, and something in my chest pinged painfully at the confirmation. We've transferred him to the NICU. He's extremely premature, but he's breathing with support. Breathing. Not dead. It was such a small word, and yet it weighed everything. Can I see him? I asked. She hesitated. They're stabilizing him now. Only one person at a time in the bay. Are you the mother? The word hit me harder than I expected. No, I said quietly. But his father is on his way. And I swallowed. There was no form for what I was to this child. Victim? Almost mother? Ghost the story was supposed to be built on. I'm the reason he exists, I said finally. In a way. And I'm the only one here right now. The nurse studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Come with me. Just for a minute. There's a gown and sanitizer station at the NICU doors. Follow my lead and don't touch anything unless they tell you. The NICU felt like stepping onto another planet, dim lights, constant beeps, air warm just enough to make your skin feel odd. Rows of incubators lined the room like tiny spaceships, each with its own constellation of monitors. The nurse led me to one near the back. Here, she said softly. This is baby boy Bennett Whitaker. The incubator was smaller than I'd imagined, clear plastic with portholes in the side. Inside, on a nest of white blankets, lay the smallest human being I'd ever seen. He looked impossibly fragile. His skin was red and almost translucent, veins a faint blue map beneath the surface. His eyes were fused shut. His chest fluttered under the curve of a ventilator tube. Wires and lines connected him to machines that chirped and hissed, translating his struggle into numbers. My hand flew to my mouth. That's a baby? I whispered. I'd seen pictures of micropreemies before, but nothing prepares you for the reality. He's 23 weeks and 5 days, the nurse said. Just over a pound. We're giving him surfactant to help his lungs, watching for bleeds, infections, all the usual risks. I searched for the right word. Not small. Small was what you called newborn clothes. Raw. She nodded. They come to us before they're finished. Our job is to finish what the womb didn't get time to. I stepped closer, pressing my hands to the sides of the incubator. Can he feel anything? Oh, yes, she said. Not the way we do, maybe, but he responds. sound, touch, changes in light. You can talk to him, if you want. Babies know more than we give them credit for. My throat closed up. What did you say to a child literally created out of your worst nightmare? Hi, I managed. My breath fogged the plastic. I didn't think we'd meet like this. He moved, just the tiniest twitch of a leg. One of the monitors blipped. That's a good sign, the nurse said. He's fighting. I watched his chest rise and fall in quick, shallow breaths. Every exhale felt like a coin toss. I'm sorry, I whispered, surprising myself. You deserved better than all of this. A hand touched my shoulder. I turned, expecting another nurse. It was Darius. His hair was a mess, his shirt buttoned crooked, tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked like he'd sprinted from the parking lot, which he probably had. Is that? His voice broke. This is him, I said, stepping aside. Your son. He moved to the incubator as if in a trance. The nurse gave him a quick rundown, her tone gentle but matter-of-fact. Darius barely seemed to hear her. His eyes were locked on the tiny, struggling body inside the plastic. My God, he whispered. He's so little. He's critical but stable, the nurse said. The neonatologist will be by soon to talk with both of you about what to expect. We stood there, two people who'd once planned nurseries and baby names together, now shoulder to shoulder in front of a child born out of theft and lies. And none of that mattered in that moment. All that mattered was that he was here, and might not stay. They took us to a small family room off the NICU for the formal briefing. The neonatologist, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a tired smile, went through the list of risks: brain bleeds, lung issues, infections, the possibility of long-term disabilities. We'll be watching him hour by hour, she said. It's going to be a roller coaster. Good days, bad days. We can't make promises, but we can tell you we'll do everything we can. She slid a clipboard across the table. We'll need consent for some of the interventions. Blood transfusions, central lines, intubation. Normally the mother signs, but she's still in recovery. Mr. Bennett, as the father, your signature will suffice for now. Darius's hand shook as he picked up the pen. He signed each page like it was a confession. The doctor turned to me. And you are? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. There still wasn't a word for me. I'm Naomi, I said. I was married to Darius. We did IVF together. The pregnancy, I faltered, glancing at him. He nodded, eyes wet. She's the reason I even know any of this is wrong, he told the doctor. What Sloan and the clinic did, it wasn't legal. Or ethical. Naomi uncovered it. The doctor's expression didn't change much, but I saw the flicker of concern. Liability. Lawsuits. Headlines. We can discuss that part later, she said calmly. Right now, our focus is on the baby. You're welcome to be involved in his care, Ms. Naomi. We believe babies benefit from more people who love them, not fewer. Love. I didn't know if I loved him yet. But I felt something. A gravitational pull I hadn't expected. We went back to the NICU and stood in front of the incubator again. Darius pressed his palm against the plastic. "I'm so sorry, little man," he whispered. "You deserved a better start than this." His shoulders shook. Without thinking, I reached out and touched his arm. For the first time in months, he didn't flinch away. He leaned into the contact like a man who'd been treading water too long. We stayed like that, connected by guilt and fear and the tiny life between us. A bridge, whether we wanted it or not. Sloane survived. She spent a night in ICU, then was moved to a postpartum room on the maternity floor, which felt wrong, like putting a thief in a jewelry store. But her blood pressure stabilized, the hemorrhaging slowed, and the surgeons were cautiously optimistic. A nurse told us when she woke up. I half expected Darius to go in alone. Instead he turned to me in the hallway outside her room. "Will you?" he swallowed. "Can you come with me?" I almost said no. I owed Sloane nothing. But then I thought of her on the gurney, whispering my name through lips flecked with blood. Of the weight of the ventilator on her child's tiny chest. "Okay," I said. She looked smaller in the hospital bed, swallowed by white sheets and 4 lines. Her hair hung limp around her face. When her eyes opened and found us, they looked huge, almost feverish. "You're alive," she croaked. "Apparently so are you," I said before I could stop myself. She tried to laugh and winced instead, hand flying to her abdomen. C-section. Feels like I've been sawed in half. Darius moved to the foot of the bed, unsure where he was allowed to stand. "They had to move quickly," he said. "You lost a lot of blood." "The baby?" she demanded, struggling to sit up. "Where is he? Is he okay?" "He's in the NICU," I said. "He's fighting." Her eyes filled instantly. "I want to see him." "You can't yet," Darius said gently. "They said you need to stabilize first. But we've been with him. He's so small, Sloane." She squeezed her eyes shut, tears slipping out the corners. For the first time since I'd known her, there was no gloss, no performance. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. I could feel everything, tearing. I kept thinking, this is it. This is what I get for what I did. Her gaze jerked to me. "I deserved it," she said. "Didn't I?" Something in my chest twisted. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to catalog every wound she'd caused and hand it back to her like an invoice. But I pictured the incubator. The way the baby's leg had twitched when I spoke. "No one deserves to die on an operating table," I said. "But you do have to live with what you've done." Her face crumpled. "I don't know how." She reached out, not to Darius, but to me. Her fingers closed around my wrist with surprising strength. "Naomi, please," she whispered. "You saw him. Does he look like a person who doesn't care how he got here?" I said softly. "Just that someone shows up for him." Her grip tightened. "If I don't make it, promise me you'll." "You're not dying," I cut in. "Promise me," she insisted, desperation sharpening her voice. "Promise you'll look out for him. You're the only one who ever did things the right way." I looked at her, at the woman who had dismantled my life piece by piece, and realized she was genuinely terrified, not of going to jail or being found out, but of leaving that baby alone. I'll be there for him, I said. No matter what happens to you. Her shoulders sagged in relief. She let go of my wrist, hand falling back to the sheet. A beat of silence, then, so quietly I almost missed it, she added, I'm so sorry, Naomi. For once, there was no defensiveness in it. No justification. Just raw regret. It was the first crack in the wall she'd built around her guilt. It wouldn't be the last. Days blurred into a routine that felt like a strange version of parenthood. I went to work, then to the hospital. Washed my hands up to the elbows, put on the yellow gown, stood by the incubator and whispered to the baby whose future had once been mine. The nurses taught me the rituals, how to rest my fingertips gently on his back without overstimulating him, how to read the monitors, how to celebrate things like no apnea episodes today, as if they were first smiles. They called him Baby Bennett for the first week. It felt clinical, temporary, like he was a file instead of a person. One evening, as Darius and I stood watching his tiny chest rise and fall, a nurse asked, "Have you chosen a name yet?" "It's okay if you haven't, but it can help. Makes it feel more real." Darius looked at me. "We haven't talked about it," he admitted. A name had been sitting in the back of my mind for days, stubborn and insistent. It had shown up uninvited, the way some thoughts do. "Ezra," I said before I could stop myself. They both looked at me. "It means help or helper," I said, suddenly self-conscious. "In Hebrew. I read it once in a baby name book. Back when we were, you know. It stuck with me." Darius's expression softened. "Ezra," he repeated, testing it on his tongue as he looked at the baby. "Yeah. I like that." The nurse scribbled it on the whiteboard attached to the incubator, Baby Ezra. Seeing it written made something click inside my chest. Over the next week, Sloane's recovery brought with it something like a breakdown. The facade that had carried her through the affair, the lies, the IVF theft, it all peeled away under hospital lights. One afternoon, I walked into her room and found her staring at the ceiling, eyes red-rimmed. "Did you know," she said without preamble, "that when I first came to your house, I'd already booked my first appointment at your clinic?" I sat in the chair by her bed. "No," I said. "I didn't. I'd seen you post about it on social media," she continued. "About your journey. About the doctor who gave you hope when others didn't." I told myself I was just curious. Just researching. Her mouth twisted. "I walked into your living room and took notes on your life like it was a catalog." She swallowed hard. "I told them I was your friend," she said. "That you referred me. That you and Darius were considering donating and used embryos someday and wanted me to be first in line. It wasn't true, but it made them trust me faster." "That's fraud," I said quietly. "I know," she whispered. "I know." And when the first nurse hesitated, I found another. And another. And eventually I found one who needed cash badly enough to look the other way. Tears slid down her temples into her hairline. "I betrayed you," she said. "I betrayed him. I betrayed that baby. I don't even know who I am anymore." "Someone very broken," I said. "Who broke everyone else to feel less alone." She squeezed her eyes shut. "They want me to talk to the hospital board," she said. Risk management. They said if I cooperate, it might help. It will, I said. Not just legally. For you. She turned her head toward me. Will you be there? I thought of all the nights I'd cried because of her. All the appointments. The party. Yes, I said. I'll be there. The disciplinary hearing for the fertility doctor was held in a conference room that had probably hosted boring PowerPoints and retirement parties before it became the scene of a career funeral. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but they hovered in the lobby, eyes sharp, cameras ready. Whistleblower IVF scandal made for good headlines. The board panel sat in a row at the front, expressions carved from stone. The doctor, our former doctor, sat at a table with her attorney, looking smaller than I remembered, but not small enough for me to forget what she'd done. Sloane spoke first. She told them everything. How she'd lied about being referred. How she'd pressed for information about our stored samples. How the doctor had initially refused to do anything outside protocol, then had called back days later with an option that wasn't exactly legal but could be justified if everyone kept quiet. She said desperate people do desperate things, Sloane said, voice shaking. She said Naomi and Darius might never use the samples, and if they did, they'd probably fail again. She framed it like I was rescuing their genetic material from a wasted future. The lawyer tried to object. The board shut him down. When it was my turn, I stood, palms slick, and told my side. The years of trying. The trust we'd placed in that clinic. The way the doctor had hugged me after a failed transfer and said, "We'll get there, don't you worry," while apparently planning to hand pieces of our future to someone else. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just told the truth. Darius followed. He talked about consent. About waking up one day to discover he'd become a father through a procedure he'd never agreed to. About the sense of violation, like someone had used his body while he slept. By the time the hearing adjourned, the outcome felt inevitable. The doctor lost her license. There would be further investigations, possibly criminal charges. The compromised technician cooperated, her testimony as damning as anything we'd said. Sloane signed whatever documents the hospital's lawyers put in front of her. Full cooperation. No appeal. Walking out of that building, I felt hollowed out and strangely light, like someone had carved something ugly out of me and left a clean wound behind. It still hurt. But it could heal. That night, I went straight from the hearing to the NICU. Ezra had been having a good day, according to the nurse. Less oxygen support, fewer Brady episodes. In preemie world, that counted as a celebration. I scrubbed in, donned the gown, and made my way to his incubator. The room was dim, the machines humming their constant lullaby. He looked bigger. Not by much, but enough that the cannulas seemed less overwhelming on his face. His tiny fingers flexed, like he was reaching for something only he could see. "Hey," I murmured, resting my hands on the sides of the incubator. "You've been busy." I watched his chest, the rapid rise and fall that had become its own language to me. "You have no idea," I whispered. "You have no idea how many adults you've dragged into the light." Footsteps approached behind me. I didn't have to turn to know it was Darius. His reflection appeared faintly in the incubator's curve. "How'd it go?" he asked softly. "As well as it could," I said. Her license is gone. They're opening a larger investigation into the clinic's practices. Sloane didn't hold anything back. He exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and grief. Good. We stood there in silence for a while. Then, impulsively, I slipped one hand through the porthole in the incubator, the way the nurse had shown me, and let my fingertips rest lightly on Ezra's back. His skin was still so soft, so warm. You deserved better beginnings, little one, I whispered. But I'm here now. For a moment, nothing changed. Then his tiny foot curled, pressing against my wrist with surprising intent. One of the monitors blipped upward, a good blip, the nurse had taught me, the kind that meant he'd felt something comforting. I felt rather than saw Darius's reaction. A sharp inhale. The soft rustle as he wiped at his face. When I glanced sideways, his eyes were shining. He knows you, he said hoarsely. Somehow, he knows you. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. My hand stayed where it was, steady and sure, as Ezra fought his invisible battles on the other side of the plastic. I wasn't his mother, not yet, not in any official sense. But in that quiet, humming room, with Darius at my shoulder and our stolen child under my hand, I realized something simple and terrifying. I was falling in love with him anyway. Sloane was the one who finally said what we were all circling around. It happened 3 months after the hearing, in a small conference room at the hospital that still smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Ezra had just crossed the 1.5-pound mark. He'd come off the ventilator for the first time and was trialing CPAP. The nurses were quietly hopeful. Sloane sat across from us, thinner than I'd ever seen her, hair pulled back, a soft cardigan swallowing her narrow shoulders. A stack of legal documents lay on the table between us like a white flag. "I'm moving to Seattle," she said. Her voice wobbled, but she held my gaze. "My sister's there. There's a program that specializes in people like me." "People like you?" Darius asked carefully. She gave a humorless smile. "Women who blow up their lives and other people's to fill the holes in their own. They call it intensive trauma and accountability therapy. I call it not ruining anyone else for a while." I didn't say anything. I just watched her. She took a breath and nudged the papers toward us. "These are custodial agreements. I've talked to a lawyer. I want you both to have full residential custody of Ezra." Darius blinked. "Sloane, you don't have to." "Yes," she cut in gently. "I do." Her eyes shone, but her voice stayed steady. "I made him lie," she said. "You two will raise him with truth. That's the only way I know how to do right by him now." For a moment, no one moved. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. It was, I realized, the most selfless thing I had ever seen her do. Darius's hand found mine under the table, fingers lacing with a familiarity that surprised us both. We read the documents line by line, asked questions, and signed where they told us. When it was done, Sloane exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the day she forged Darius's name. "Tell him I loved him," she whispered. "Just tell him I finally learned what that word means." "We'll tell him everything," I said. "When he's old enough." She nodded, wiped her cheeks, and left for a new life on the other side of the country, carrying only a small suitcase and more guilt than I'd wish on anyone. Moving back into the house I'd fled felt less like coming home and more like walking into a crime scene after the tape had been taken down. We didn't announce it. There was no dramatic, "Naomi's back" moment. It happened in stages, the way seasons change, one box at a time, one night on the couch that turned into two. At first, I came over to help with Ezra's discharge preparations. He was finally strong enough to leave the hospital, though still tethered to monitors and oxygen, the NICU nurses sending us home with a binder thick as a textbook and a list of instructions that could have run a small clinic. "It'll be easier if you stay in the guest room for a while," Darius said, standing in the doorway, hands stuffed in his pockets. "Just until we get into a rhythm." For Ezra. For Ezra. It was our favorite shield. The guest room had once been my office. My old mug sat on the desk, a ring of dust outlining where it had been. In the top drawer, I found letters I'd written myself during the worst of the infertility journey, pep talks on pretty stationery, addressed to future Naomi, holding our baby. I sat on the floor and read them all. I cried for the woman who wrote them, and for the one who was now unpacking her life in the same room, older and a little less naive, but still breathing. The house was full of ghosts, our wedding photos on the wall, slightly crooked, the throw blanket from the night of the affair, folded neatly on a chair, the nick in the baseboard from when we tried to build a crib we never used. But as days passed, the ghosts shifted. Their edges softened. New memories began to layer over the old ones. This time when I walked the hallway at 3 a.m., I wasn't alone and empty. I was carrying a 5-pound miracle with a feeding tube taped to his cheek and tiny fists curled around my shirt. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt busy. Co-parenting a medically fragile child is like joining a secret club whose only membership requirement is exhaustion. We lived by alarms, one for meds, one for feeds, one for pulse ox checks. Night was a series of short sleeps between beeps. We made a schedule and taped it to the fridge. I took the midnight and 4 a.m. feeds because I was better at waking instantly. Darius handled the 2 a.m. equipment checks and 6 a.m. syringe flushes. We kept a shared notebook of every ounce Ezra took in, every diaper, every odd sound or color. At first, we spoke about logistics. Did he finish the last feed? The doctor wants his weight again on Friday. His seats dipped at 2. I turned up the oxygen just a hair. But somewhere between the late-night sterilizing of bottles and the tag-team pediatric appointments, space opened for other words. One bleary 1 a.m., as we both hovered in the glow of Ezra's monitor, Darius said quietly, "I'm sorry I said you were obsessed with the clinic logs back then. You were right to be." "I know," I said. He stared at the green numbers on the screen. "I don't deserve you helping like this." "Maybe not," I said. Then, softer, "But Ezra does." He nodded, eyes wet. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the kind of man who does." We didn't hash out the whole affair in one grand conversation. Instead, truths slipped out in small, honest fragments, over lukewarm coffee, in the car outside the pharmacy, on the porch while Ezra's monitor crackled faintly through the baby monitor. "I wanted to believe her," he admitted one evening. "Because believing her meant I hadn't betrayed you on purpose. It meant I was just weak, not cruel." "I know the difference now," I said. And knowing doesn't erase what happened. But it explains it. Forgiveness wasn't fireworks. It was more like erosion, slow, steady, almost invisible, until one day I realized the jagged edges of my anger had been worn down to something duller, something that didn't cut every time I touched it. Romance didn't come back with a bang. It seeped in through the cracks, cautious and gentle. One night, after Ezra had finally gone down without a fight, we collapsed on opposite ends of the couch and put on some mindless movie. Halfway through, a joke landed harder than it should have, and I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Darius turned to look at me, surprised, as if he'd spotted a rare bird in the backyard. "I missed that sound," he said quietly. I looked back at him. "Me too." Our hands brushed when we both reached for the same bowl of popcorn. Neither of us moved away. We cooked together again, falling back into rhythms I'd forgotten, me seasoning without measuring, him setting timers for everything. We argued about the right way to load the dishwasher. We sat on the porch while Ezra slept, wrapped in blankets, watching the sky bleed from orange to blue. There were no grand declarations. No "I still love you" speeches. There were small, consistent gestures, a cup of coffee placed by my elbow without comment, his hand on the small of my back as we navigated crowded waiting rooms, the way he always took the side of the bed closest to Ezra's room, just in case. Little by little, the tension between us shifted, from wounded to wary to warm. One night, as I tucked Ezra in, Darius appeared at the doorframe, leaning against it like he used to. "I know you're not here as my wife," he said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I would like the chance to earn that again. Slowly. On your terms." I looked down at Ezra, at the tiny chest rising and falling. Then I looked back at the man who'd hurt me and was now showing up to every night feed, every therapy appointment, every hard conversation. "Keep doing what you're doing," I said. "We'll see where we land." It wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no either. Ezra repaid us in milestones. His first smile came in the middle of a physical therapy session, tiny face cracking open as he kicked against the therapist's hands. His first breath without any oxygen support happened on a gray afternoon that suddenly felt like summer. We all cried, the respiratory therapist included. The night we finally brought him home without monitors, I lay awake listening for machines that weren't there. The silence was terrifying and beautiful. He took his first steps in the living room, wobbling from the coffee table to my knees, arms flung wide, squealing with delight. Darius hooped so loudly we scared him into sitting down and crying, then all three of us laughed until we couldn't breathe. Each first was a brick in something new we were building, less like the house we'd planned and more like a patchwork shelter, stitched together with second chances. Sloane kept her promise to stay away. But she also kept another promise, to love him from a distance. Once a month, she flew in from Seattle for a weekend visit. The first time, my stomach knotted so tight I almost canceled. But when she stepped into our living room, carrying a small stuffed elephant and a tremor in her hands, the old electric rivalry wasn't there. There was just a woman facing the consequences of her choices, and a boy who squealed, "Sloaney," because that's what we'd decided to teach him to call her, something affectionate but not confusing. She read to him on the couch, her voice soft. She asked detailed questions about his therapies, his favorite foods, his sleep schedule. She didn't overstep. She didn't hint at taking him back. When he got tired and cranky, she handed him back to me without argument. Watching her, I felt something settle inside me. Not friendship. Not quite. But a kind of truce. We were, in a strange, fragile way, all his. Sometimes, when the house was finally quiet and Ezra's toys lay scattered across the rug like proof of life, I would sit on the couch and take stock. The affair hadn't destroyed me. It had stripped me down to the scaffolding, yes, but it hadn't taken the part of me that could love or trust or get back up. The pregnancy hadn't erased me. If anything, it has made me more visible, to myself most of all. It had forced me to see what I would and wouldn't stand for, what I could and couldn't forgive. The confession hadn't broken me. It freed me. Freed me from lies, from pretending, from the version of my marriage that only looked solid from a distance. Freed me to choose this new life, messy and honest and nothing like the one I'd planned. Truth had become our foundation, flawed, uneven, but real. We'd built a family on it, one little boy, 2 imperfect parents trying hard, and one woman 3 states away learning what accountability really meant. On Ezra's 2nd birthday, we strung lights across the backyard and set up a folding table with too much food. Zora lit candles, Darius manned the grill, Sloane stood off to the side, hands clasped, watching with a complicated smile. Ezra sat in his high chair at the center of it all, a tiny king in a paper crown, a mountain of frosting in front of him. "Go on, baby," I said. "It's all yours." He plunged both hands into the cake like it had personally offended him. Frosting flew. Everyone laughed. Then he turned to me, eyes bright, cheeks smeared pink, and patted my face with a sticky palm. Sugar and dye streaked my skin. "Mama, happy," he announced, as if it were a fact he'd just discovered and needed to share. The world seemed to pause for a heartbeat, sound dimming around the edges. I felt Darius's gaze on us, felt Sloane's too, like 2 beams of light converging. My throat tightened. "Yeah," I whispered, kissing his frosting-covered fingers. "Mama's happy." For the first time in a long time, it wasn't a promise or a performance. It was simply true.